I remember thinking, absurdly, that the veil itched. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't painful. It was just there. An insistent, delicate irritation along my forehead. The kind you notice only when everything else has gone unnaturally quiet. The kind of thing your body does when it wants to remind you that it exists separately from the ceremony it has been drafted into. Everything else about the morning had been choreographed down to the minute. The flowers arrived at the side door at precisely 9:30, wrapped in brown paper and optimism. Someone fussed over the arrangements, rotating them slightly as if one angle might be luckier than another. The photographer asked me to tilt my head, then laughed lightly and asked for natural laughter, as though that were something that could be summoned on command. My mother corrected the angle of my shoulders more than once, guiding them back with firm, practiced hands, as if posture were a moral quality. Everyone seemed to know their cues. Everyone except my body. The itch persisted. It didn't ruin anything. It didn't announce itself. It just sat there, quietly undermining the illusion that this moment belonged entirely to the script everyone else seemed to be following. It felt like a reminder, small but unmistakable, that I hadn't signed whatever invisible contract the room had agreed to honor. I told myself to ignore it. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself that in an hour it would be over, and I would be allowed to move freely again, allowed to scratch my forehead if I wanted to. But the air inside the building began to feel thick, sweet with perfume and hairspray and expectation. So I stepped outside for air, slipping away while no one was actively watching me. The cold surprised me. The ground was glazed with a thin skin of ice, the kind that made every step cautious and deliberate, forcing your attention downward. It was the sort of ice that looked harmless until you tested it, the sort that demanded humility. I adjusted my footing instinctively, lifting the hem of my dress slightly, grateful for the quiet. That's when I saw my grandmother. She wasn't coming from the building. She was walking toward me from the parking lot, her pace unhurried, her head bent slightly against the cold. Her coat was buttoned wrong. Not dramatically, just one button off, the way it often was when she dressed herself in a hurry. Her hair was pinned in the same style she had worn for as long as I could remember, a style that had survived decades of changing fashions without ever once acknowledging them. She looked out of place and perfectly herself at the same time. She didn't smile. She didn't say congratulations. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pressed a small blue book into my hands. It was old, cloth-bound. The edges were softened by time, worn smooth in a way that suggested it had been handled often but carefully. It was heavier than it looked, the way certain objects are when they carry more than their physical weight. A savings book. I recognized it instantly, though I had never held one like it before. I recognized it the way you recognize a word from a language you grew up hearing but never learned to speak. Familiar, resonant, and just out of reach. "For you," she said. Her voice was steady, calm in that particular way that never asked to be challenged. Her hands, however, trembled slightly as she released the book into my palms. "You keep it." I opened my mouth to ask what it was. Or maybe to tell her she didn't have to bring gifts. Or maybe just to say thank you because that was what this moment seemed to require. But before any of those sentences could form, my father was suddenly there. He had followed us outside, his breath visible in sharp, impatient bursts. The cold didn't slow him down. It never had. He stood too close, his presence filling the space between us. "What's that?" he said. His tone carried an accusation even before he knew what he was accusing. My grandmother didn't answer. She rarely did when he spoke to her that way. Silence had always been her most reliable defense. I held the book out slightly, uncertain. Already, the familiar reflex kicked in, the urge to explain myself before anyone accused me of something, the need to justify my existence in small, careful ways. He took the book from my hands. His fingers closed around it with a confidence that didn't belong to him. He glanced at the cover, and then he laughed. It was a short sound, sharp and dismissive, designed not to share humor but to establish hierarchy. He turned slightly as he spoke, angling his body so the bridesmaids near the door could hear. "This," he said loudly, "this is garbage." The word hung in the air, crude and absolute. Before I could react, before I could reach for it, before I could speak, he threw it. The book slid across the ice, skidding in a straight, helpless line until it came to rest near a dirty snowbank at the edge of the lot. The sound it made wasn't dramatic. There was no crack, no tear, no visible damage, just a dull scrape. But the word he followed it with landed harder than the impact ever could. Garbage belongs with garbage. There was a pause. Not the kind you see in movies. Not a collective gasp or a dramatic confrontation. Just the brief, uncomfortable silence that happens when people don't know whether to intervene or pretend nothing happened. I didn't look at my grandmother. I was afraid that if I did, I would say something sharp and uncontained. Something that had been waiting for years to be spoken. Something that would make the moment irreparable in a way I wasn't ready for. Not yet. So I did the one thing that felt possible. I turned around and walked back inside. The ceremony went on. Vows were exchanged. Hands were held. Promises were spoken with confidence and applause followed on cue. I smiled when prompted. I laughed when expected. I kissed when instructed. I performed my role with precision. Somewhere between the first dance and the cutting of the cake, when the room was loud enough to swallow absence, I slipped back outside alone. The parking lot was mostly empty now. Cars had been rearranged, some already gone. The cold felt sharper without adrenaline to dull it. The savings book was still there, damp at the edges, slightly darkened where the cloth had absorbed melted ice, but intact. I picked it up quickly, my fingers aching from the cold, and tucked it into my coat like contraband, like something I wasn't supposed to have but knew, suddenly, that I needed to protect. I didn't tell anyone. 2 days later, I went to the bank. I almost didn't. The voice I'd grown up with, the one that sounded suspiciously like my father's, narrated the drive with relentless confidence. It's probably nothing. Old people keep useless papers. Don't embarrass yourself. Each thought arrived fully formed, polished by repetition. The bank lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and toner. The lighting was unforgiving. I stood in line, rehearsing an apology I hadn't been asked to give, practicing a casual tone that would soften the possibility of being wrong. When it was my turn, I slid the book across the counter with a practiced half-smile. "I'm not sure if this is still valid," I said. The teller took it without comment. She was young, efficient, the kind of person whose neutrality felt like judgment because it offered no reassurance either way. She opened the cover, flipped a page, and stopped. Her posture changed first, then her face. She looked up at me, then back down at the book. Then she pressed a button under the counter. "I'm going to need my manager," she said quietly. "And ma'am, please don't leave." It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no crowd gathering. But something in the way she said please, not polite, but urgent, made my stomach drop. A man in a gray suit appeared within seconds. He took the book, scanned it, then looked at me with an expression that was careful and newly respectful. The kind of expression reserved for people whose circumstances have shifted without their permission. "This account," he said, "has been active for a very long time." He didn't say the number out loud at first. Instead, he turned the screen so I could see it myself. Rows of deposits, dates stretching back decades, accrued interest calculated with a precision that felt almost intimate. Each entry a quiet act of intention. My grandmother's quiet life translated into figures that could not be laughed away. "I'm sorry," I said reflexively. "I didn't know." He shook his head gently. "There's nothing to apologize for." The teller was watching me now with something like awe, or maybe relief, as if she were glad I'd come in before something irreversible had happened. The process took time. Forms, verification, calm explanations delivered without fanfare. No one mentioned my father. No one mentioned garbage. When I finally left, the air felt different. Not lighter, just steadier. At the reception that evening, my father raised a glass and made a speech about family, about sacrifice, about how far we had come. I listened politely. Later, I found my grandmother sitting alone at a table near the wall, picking at a slice of cake. I sat beside her. I went to the bank, I said. She nodded, as if this had always been the natural next step. Good. We didn't talk about the money. We didn't talk about my father. But for the first time, I understood that what she had handed me wasn't just a book. It was proof. Not for anyone else, but for me. Proof that what had been dismissed had always mattered. The itch under the veil was gone.